Thanks, everybody. So I'm a bit of a loud talker, so I don't know if I need this or not. Yeah, I'm Stan, like Jonathan said. Bally Design's been around for 50 years. I've been there for 26 of them, helping to build out the digital side of the business. Started as an industrial design company focused on designing physical products, but then those products expanded to having touch screens on them and apps that went with them and dashboards that presented the data, and so I built out that whole side of the business. And so today I wanted to talk to you guys. I know the conference is about innovation, big thoughts, right? Big technology, new ideas, innovative, groundbreaking, all that, disruptive. But disruptive is great if you're disrupting a business, but you don't want to disrupt somebody's day with your product. And so making sure that your product is something that is useful and engaging and not a pain in your ass is really, really important for your product to get the adoption that it needs and to take off. So I think we can all see why the ease of use of a product is useful. So I wanted to focus today on sort of the how. Like, how do you get to intuitive, right? We all hear that word a lot. And so I'll start with a user interface in general. User interfaces are a person talking to a device, right? It could be through a website, it could be through your app, it might be voice activated, it might be a touch screen on a piece of an industrial equipment. And then there's the design process. And so designing for those things, this is what Bally Design, we've been doing this for 50 years, this is the process that we go through. It is a sequential process, but it's worth noting that it's not linear. It's a very iterative process, and I'll talk about that in a minute. The early phases of a project are trying to understand the people. Who's going to use your product? Who's going to adopt it? Who wants this new technology, and how does it fit in with their lives? So that's what we're doing way up front, is just understanding the people that are going to use it. Then you get into what people traditionally think of as design. We have lots of ideas, lots of brainstorming. How do we sort of distill those down, keep coming down to the one solution that you're actually going to launch with? And that goes through a few different levels of exploration, where you're dealing with lots of ideas, design development where you've kind of narrowed it down to a single idea and you're just refining it, and then detailed design where you're getting into every little nuance of how this thing actually works. It doesn't stop there, though. Developers have to program it. Marketers have to figure out how they're going to talk about it. And so we get into the detailed design and transition to production. That's where we start to make sure that everybody understands how the design works, what the users do there, how it should be built from a developer side. Here's the toolkit that you use. Here's how things behave, all of that. And that all happens in this back end part of the process. Now, you'll see there's these little loops here. A project, an entire product, will move through this very linearly. And we'll get to, say, concept development here, but something in there is not working, right? So there may be pieces of it that loop back into concept exploration, where we have to try a few new ideas. And you get this build, measure, learn, agile loop that happens in here. The whole project doesn't stop and go backwards. That scares everybody, right? But it's not that. It's little pieces that have to go back and sort of hit another loop before it's mature enough to move along with everything else. Eventually, it's all out, you launch, and everything's. So if we take the interfaces that I talked about, people interacting with machines, and then you take that process, how do you put those together? So not that long ago, and I'm talking less than 10 years, people would say, well, what's a user interface? It's what's on the screen, right? It's what does somebody look at? It's what's there. Well, how do I navigate? What do I interact with? Is it branded right? Sometimes I have my colors on it, that's supposed to. But as the discipline has grown, as more and more products have become digital, so is the vernacular, so is the terminology, so is everything else. So now we have whole divisions that are groups of people that are specialized in one thing. And we have terms like UX, UI, there's other ones. Does anyone know UX? Anybody have a good guess on it? Yep, that one's easy. That one's user experience. UI, yep, user interface. So those are, how do those fit together? So you have user experience. Think of somebody says, we're building a new 5-star hotel. You have to have an architect. You start with the architect, right? The Why are we building this? How are people going to move around the building? How do we structure where's the lobby as it relates to the kitchen and the dining area and all the rooms, and you sort of map all that out. UI starts to come alongside them eventually. That's your interior designers that are saying, I need to make this comfortable, I need to make sure what's the materials that we're going to use, how are we going to do the lighting, all that, and they start to work together to build a finished product. So there's another layer in between here that they call information architecture. This is one of the newer letters that we have in here. And if you remember the slide right before this where it talked about what a typical user interface definition was, how's it organized? So if you think about somebody having to give a talk, you're writing a white paper, something like that, you put together a content outline first, the bullet points. What's going to go where? What are we going to talk about? Things like that. That's information architecture, where you're starting to decide what content goes in what sequence for a person as they move through your interface. Companies don't have one product, most. They start to develop more and more and more products. Each of those products will have its own user experience. So I have an app, I have a website, I might have some other product, and each of those start to have their own structure. The designer's job is to make sure that these are consistent across each other so that the entire experience for your product doesn't start to feel very disparate. So, new one, customer experience. They like to use banks as an example for this one. So a bank will have your browser accessible website, you'll probably have an app, you'll have your ATM, you'll have your branch where you go and you talk to people in person. There might be your safety deposit box there. There's a lot of interactions and touch points that a person has with your company. And so they want to make sure that when all those happen, it still feels like you're in the same bank. They're not totally different experiences all over the place. And so you can have design happening in any level here. Someone looking at the whole company experience, making sure that it's cohesive. You might have somebody just down here trying to make sure we have the right buttons in the right place with the right colors. And so structurally, that's how that all goes together. And depending on how big a company is, you might have people that specialize in one thing, or for like Bally Design, we're a consultancy, our designers sort of touch all the different pieces of it. So we're looking at the overall experience, that's your UX. We're looking at how do we organize the information in that, that's your information architecture. And then of course, does it look good? Is it doing what it's supposed to? Is the graphic design supporting the tasks, the workflow that the person is going through? So I've been doing this a long time, like Jonathan said. And one word over and over and over and over again keeps coming up in product requirements, and it's why I named this talk this. Make it intuitive, right? Intuitive, the crystal ball that I can look into, see the future, make it, I know what everybody wants to do, it just happens all naturally and magically, right? That's what somebody wants to do. And so, make it easy to use, make it easy to understand. I mean, that's easy to put in requirements, make it easy to use. Okay, but what do you actually do with that? And so, if you look at the definition of intuitive, it's pretty simple, really. It's readily learned or understood. It's instinctive, natural. That's intuitive. Simple as those things right there. And so what we do is we take our process and say, look at these things. Can we make it easy to learn and easy to understand? Can we make it feel natural to the user? So I said I'm going to walk you guys through this. It's going to be fast. I'm going to give you the entire process. It's going to come at you pretty quick. But I want you to understand that the process is where the intuition comes up. It's not a certain point in the process where you say, okay, it's time to make it intuitive, right? It is the process that creates that intuition. It's what finds the ways that your product will best engage with your user naturally through the process. And innovation in general isn't about adding the next big thing on it. Sometimes it is about simplifying it down to making it to its pure essence and make it be as effective as possible. So, where do we start? People. I talked about the process earlier on. there's going to be a little key here along the bottom here. It's going to let you sort of know what activities are happening. Right now this is sort of a user experience activity, and they're in that early discovery phase. So this will show up on all the slides as kind of keep things oriented as to where we are in the process. But really early on in the discovery process, the user experience tasks is you're trying to understand the users, what are their needs, what are their pains, what do they do today before your product is even part of their day. How are they solving the problems that you're looking to solve? How are they doing it in their way right now? And so your job is to listen, to document, to ask open-ended questions, not yes/no questions, right? It's questions where you have to make them think, you have to make them talk, you have to make them really, illustrate their need through what are they doing. And one of the great things about this is if you can do this in person, so I've done a bunch of these, and we do a lot of work in, we've done a lot of interfaces in the medical environment. It's very regulated, there's a lot of like high level requirements on it, but when you go down to the nurse level and the person that's using this, it's really great if you can talk to them in their space and see how they do this, because what you'll find is as they're walking through something on the screen to tell you about it, there's Post-it notes attached to the outside of their screen. And you start to say, well, what's that? Oh, that's this workaround that I came up with to make this a little bit easier. This is how I remember what I need to do the next steps. When I go to a factory and I'm talking to an industrial operator, sometimes there's a laminated sheet of paper that his boss put next to the thing that tells him what buttons to press at what time. Those are not intuitive, but those are the things that I love to find when I'm out doing this research, because those are my opportunities. Those are the areas that the nurse felt the need to create a workaround. I can fix it. And so that's what you're trying to do out there, is really understand the user. And some of the things that you end up, once you have that data, some of the things you can produce from there is personas. Who's using this, right? Let's define the kind of users we have. If you end up only having one, you probably didn't look hard enough, right? There's the person that might be using it. There might have been the person that needed to set it up. There might be the IT person that has to maintain it. So there are different people that touch your interface and will have to interact with it. And you need to understand who they all are and what their needs are, so that you don't design something that works well for one of them and the other two hate it. Right? You are trying to find something that works for everyone. So you may build out user personas. You start to build out your user stories. These are precursors to use cases. So there's a typical formula that you use. It says, as a, fill in the person's role. I need to fill in what they want to do because why? And so that because is the important part. In requirements you often get, nurse needs to generate reports. Okay, great. Why do they need to generate reports? How often are they doing that? What's the importance of each report as it relates to one another? So you build out these user stories and you start to plot them all out. And that's, again, what you're using this data that you got from these user interviews to do. We might build out storyboards. If we're designing a physical product that has an interface on it, I need to know what the user did before they interacted with my product, what they might do after they interact with my product, and maybe there's points where they go, they do something with it, they walk away and have to come back to it later to like pick up a bin and walk away and do something with it. I need to understand that whole flow, because if I build a user interface that they have to stand in front of it the whole time, I've actually disrupted their normal workflow and they're going to hate it. And they're going to have to rethink their entire day to make sure that they can just do the thing that they need to do with your product. And so understanding context is really important. Journey maps, anyone ever built journey maps before or tried to build journey maps before? These are quite a chore, but they really prove insightful, right? You have a series of users and you start to say, well, what are they trying to do? And you lay it out across a time axis. And then you start to look into what frustration levels. This is fine. This is a pain in my ass. This is okay. Love this part. You start to plot all that out, figuring out the steps that someone's taking along the way, looking for those areas of conflict or areas that I can find where can I provide the best value in my design. Now, this is not about the technology, right? With the technology and the innovation is the whole product. People want this because it's going to do the next great thing, but I need to know how to use it and make sure that I can get the benefits of that new innovation and that new technology. So helps you find those problems and those opportunities. So, I started generating all these artifacts. I've got personas, I've got workflows, I've got all that sort of thing. So I have to start to think about, what does that mean for my interface? Like, where do things go? There's all these things that people want to do and all these problems that they have, and you start to put this together. You know, about people often joke about designers all post-it rooms full of post-it notes. Well, we do. We have rooms full of post-it notes. We do it on Miro or other tools as we do it, but we're trying to move things around until they start to make sense. And you can often put this in front of users and them say, that doesn't belong there. Like, that goes over here. This goes over there. And they start to, a picture starts to gel of what you're trying to do. And you need to prioritize those features and functions. Figure out what you might need to reduce or eliminate because it's just not supporting the overall goal of the product. And you sort of have to try to figure out how you want someone to use this. So I'll give you 2 examples. Typical website, lots of choices. Do I want to see this first? Do I want to go here? Do I want to look at this? Options. Tax preparation software, TurboTax. Very linear. Step 1, then step 2, then step 3. They could have put the entire tax form on the page for you and said, choose your own adventure, do it your own way. But they made a choice to do step by step. Right? So these are the kind of decisions, again, we're in exploration here. We're thinking of the different ways somebody could use this. And you can have a mix. You can start with some choices, but once you get down to a task, it switches to a linear flow. You have to do this, 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 then you're done, and you pop back out. But it's those kind of things that we're exploring here. And it's lots of ideas, lots of good ideas, lots of bad ideas. Get those out early, push them out of the way, and keep moving. If you're dealing with like a conversational user interface, so an Alexa, Google Home, things like that, it's voice, you're doing the same thing. But now you're sort of plotting out prompts and different ways that the interface will react based on how the inputs that it gets from the user. So once you started plotting all these things out, like I said, you're looking for, it's kind of hard probably to see back there, clusters, points of contention, right? This opens up really fast down here, but there's a lot of stuff going on right here that we fix that, this all comes for free. So I haven't even started to think about what's on the screens or what colors it is or my branding or anything like that. I'm still figuring out how this thing works. And I'm trying to make sure that the workflow that somebody has in this doesn't cause confusion, it doesn't frustration, right? It doesn't just make it more difficult for do something that they're already doing today. In the old days, these used to be called sitemaps. There's all kinds of new names for them. There's, depending on how much content you're going to show, it might be a user flow, it might be a screen flow, different things. But the end goal is you're starting to have that content outline I talked about, like when you're writing your paper. So here's the topic, it's the reports section. Here are the things that are going to be in there or the user's going to do in that area. And here's how it relates to other things on there. I talked about an example where you might have a full page and it get into a linear flow. That's exactly what's happening here. So there's an area where you start to like place an order, which then quickly turns into a linear flow, this, and this, in order to complete your order, and then you're back and you go back into full navigating. Same with generating reports, and there's a few other ones in this thing here. But this is not, so you build one, you use this to start designing, but this isn't done. You'll come back to this. So this goes into development. So during development, I may be prototyping some ideas, putting them in front of people. People start to say, that doesn't make any sense to me. That's not where that belongs. You come back to this, and you start to say, well, this doesn't belong here. We actually need to move it here or there, and you start to rethink this. This is never done until, well, never. Constant improvement, right? Software, over and over, new release, better and better and better. That's the definition of progress. That's the definition of innovation, is do it over and over again. But you do launch, right? You have to. But then you learn, you come back, you make changes where you need to. So things to consider at this step, and these are important. Cognitive load, how much am I asking somebody to remember and do? Right? If you showed me something 2 screens ago and it's here and now I have to remember it in order to make a decision, you've made a mistake, right? It's just not, don't make me remember things. Choice. Go to Amazon, you can buy anything you want. Even if you want to go to like their filters, there's like 10,000 ways to filter the content. The choices are enormous, right? Most products, you don't want that. You want the choices that they have to be relevant to what it is that they're doing at any one time. So in a task-based piece of software or an application or however you want to describe it, we're trying to do something. What information do I need to make that next decision, and what controls do I need to move forward? That's the choices, and that's what you're trying to control in order to make this feel easier, more natural, and fit into what they do all the time. And then disclosure. Some of the software we design is really complicated, and you have expert users that want the detail. You can use progressive disclosure. Show me more. Pull a little caret, more detail pops up. Overload the main workflow with stuff that only your expert users need. You only needs to be done to get that task done. If the expert user wants to drill in, you give them the tools to that and you present it really nicely for them. But you have to make that decision. What do I show when? That's really hard to do. People who invent things love to show off their baby. Look at all the things this can do. Let me just show you. It's a dashboard. I'm going to give you all the data. I'm going to give you all the charts and everything like that. It's too much. Right? I have a job to do, and I want to look at it, and I want to find what I need to find. Showing me everything, probably not the best use case. So I showed the content outline a second ago. Just a block that said kind of like a screen goes here. Now I got to start to look at each one of those. Each one of those blocks. Now it's the screen itself. And again, I'm going to talk a lot about a visual interface, but I'm doing the same thing with conversational UI, things like that. So you're building what is on the screen. What do they need to know in order to make the next decision? And what do they do today? So often people think of their product sort of as the central point of this person's day. Right? That they're going to be standing in front of my product all day and using it. I'll use the nurses again as an example. They probably touch a dozen pieces of software every day. They got different portals from different pharmaceutical manufacturers. They have different physical devices that they are programming and adjusting blood pressure on, all those kind of things. And so there is a language that those all speak. Understanding that so that your product comes in and just supports what they already know is really important. You don't want everyone to say, oh, well, on all my other products, the settings are over here, and I got to this one that's just been designed by these new guys, and I can't remember where it is, right? Learn what's already being done and build out. Don't reinvent the wheel where you don't need to, right? Use what exists in their realm, not yours. A lot of people will look at, well, I use this software and I use this software and I use this software. That's how they do it, so I'm going to build my software to be like this. Big mistake. You're not your user. That's a mantra that we teach all of our designers. You have to find out who that user is and what they do and build it the way that they see what makes logical sense to them. And so make it predictable in that way. I had a junior designer once come back to me and give me some new ideas. Right? He laid out the house down there in the bottom left. Well, that's how you get to the home. You go back home. Like, have you ever never visited any other website in your life? It's the logo in the upper left or the home up there is where you go when you want to start over. You want to go back to home base, right? Creating novelty and new ways of doing things for something that's not important to your product is just more noise that you're going to have to go through. Stick with what they know. Start putting screens together, laying these out, and you'll notice here, these are sketches. I don't know if you guys can tell here, but these aren't real words. These are just scribbled lines. Text goes here. And this is important because what I want people to be able to do is look at this and say, is this doing what it's supposed to do? Not, is this the right set of words? Is this the right color? I tell my junior designers all the time, this can be ugly. As long as it's clear enough that somebody understands the concept, you need to be able to do that. Because anything else you put in there, I hate pink. Why is it pink? Well, okay, we didn't mean pink. And you end up with a whole conversation about color, not what you're really trying to test. And there will be things like this just says column, column. I don't even label the columns because part of what you're trying to do is learn. What information do you need to see here? What should this be? If you had already put something in there, you've already framed you're giving them a frame of reference that you're not going to learn anything new. And so by showing them something really rough early and often, you get the right kind of feedback. So I keep talking like I'm talking to somebody, right? And somebody's giving me input. And you're going to get to that in a minute. Right now, as a matter of fact. You do need to, it's an iterative loop, right? I'm learning as I'm doing things. And so I test my product with the different sets of users. I'm not testing the entire product. I probably figured out a good 70% of it, the basics of how it should work, but there's some areas I'm just not sure, or we have conflicting information from the user research, or management wants it one way, but we're hearing this. How do we get that input? And so you test things that you need to test because you're trying to learn something specific. Do you like it, right? Challenge your own assumptions and validate the ideas that you do have. So, a very important point on this one. If the design fails, if the user struggles and they're having a hard time, your solution's failed. This isn't they used to call this user testing. Made it feel like you were testing the user. You're not, right? You're testing your product and how the user uses it, right? So if they struggle, don't help them. It's really hard not to. You really want to, but you just press here and everything's fine. Let them struggle because that's what you're learning something there. I like to, when I'm talking with different clients and they want to put this stuff out in front of everybody, I often need to have the salesperson to be the person that gets me into somewhere. Right? I need to talk to nurses. I can't just call and say, hey, I'm Stan from Bally Design. Can you let me in your hospital? They're not going to do that, right? It's like their salespeople make some contacts. They get me in there. They get me to talk to. Then I ask the salesperson, could you please leave? Right? A salesperson's job is to sell the product, tell somebody how wonderful it is, why you want to buy it, why you want to spend money, all the fantastic things about it. I'm going to be asking you, what sucks? What don't you like about this? And the salespeople or the engineers that help build this will be the first to say, well, let me help you. Let me show you how this is done. And that's not what we're looking for. And so keep it really raw, keep it really rough, but put it in front of people and let them just do what they need to do and take notes on that. So this was happening both in concept exploration where it's multiple ideas, and it continues on when you have a single idea. You're still refining it and testing it. So if I take a step back a little bit, and happening in parallel is those interior designers now, our user interface folks. They're starting to look at the ways that the interactivity and the appearance makes sense together, right? And so what do I put on the screen to focus the attention where I need it to be? What sort of content do I put over here versus over here? Where do I leave white space? How do I use color to sort of support comprehension? Not as decoration. It's not color, it's just color is there to help me find my way. It's a milestone marker along the way. And I'll point out on here, right? Intuitive, right? Here it is again. Make it easy to learn. These guys are also trying to figure out how to best do that and what do I place on the screen where in order to support that. And so as the design matures, the representation of the design starts to mature as well. So I showed early on those wireframes with scribbled text and everything like that. That's here. And you want to stay here as long as you possibly can. And I'll tell you a second why. First, I'm going to show you what happens. So I start here. I start to move forward a little bit, and we say, oh, we're going to have navigation along the side here. I'm not worried about exactly what icons they are right now. They're just circles. One of them's blue. That tells you what page you're on. People get that, right? Eventually it starts to move on even further along where now you have the actual icons, and you have your branding and your logo and everything. It looks more finished. So this has happened naturally throughout the evolution. Here is where people will actually tell you what's not working. Because they're like, they haven't put a lot of work into it yet. It's kind of messy, it's sketchy. They're okay if I tell them the whole thing sucks or everything's not working. Here, They're like, wow, these guys have put a lot of work into this. Probably don't want to hurt their feelings, so I'm going to say, you know, I don't like that icon. Or that color is a little hard for me to see, right? You're not going to get any, take it back. You will get useful feedback, but the user is going to self-select what they tell you because of where they think you are in the process. So the longer you stay here where they think you're just kind of making stuff up, yeah, let's sit down together and draw a picture, the better. Right? This is prettier, and you need this for all the marketing materials, and you need this to the C-suite, and you need to show everybody where this product is going, but live in here as long as you can when you're talking to your users. Talked about having to sell it, right? Marketing's like, I don't need to know about how it works, just show me what's it going to look like. So sometimes you have to do contextual type things where you sort of show it in use, and you show an operator in front of it ready to press the button and things like that, because the audience for the design at that point is very different. And so putting this in front of a user doesn't give you any sort of useful usability input. They're just going to be like, oh yeah, it looks cool, I'd try that. Okay, good, you'd try it. Now I don't know what to do with that, but that's good to know. And so whether it's investors or your software team, like software team doesn't need to see it on the laptop. They know it's going to be on the laptop. Show them the screens, tell them what's happening. Build it what you need at the time to show the right thing. And then the last thing, and last only in sequence of my slides, not in process, is considering all those other elements that help facilitate the context of your design. Motion is just one of them. And so what people often do is put fun little things on it, like, ooh, my logo spins around and does something. Cool is fine, as long as it doesn't distract from what I'm trying to do. But motion can be a huge facilitator in users understanding how something works. So if I have something that slides in the left or the right side, the user starts to build a spatial map of your interface. And when they say, oh, I need to do that thing, that came in from the left. So they look to the left, and if your icons are right there on the left where it's slid in, it's intuitive, it's natural. They're like, wow, I'm smart, I knew right where that was. And letting them see where they start to come, they start to build a map in their minds and start to understand how the software works. And you can do that through motion. You can also do that in voice, right? You get tones when it hears you. You get a different tone if it needs you to repeat yourself. There are prompts that it says. Different things people will start to realize, oh, that's a nice chime. I'm doing something right? But they're not there just as decoration. It actually really does help support the overall usability of it. So things that you need to think about when you're doing this stuff, right? So be consistent. And consistent is the words that you use. Make sure that don't change the word somewhere along the way. That it was once reports and now it's, something else. In behavior and its appearance. This will sort of overall help the overall cohesion. Now, I like to say that usability is still greater than consistency. If by being consistent you put a control under that and somebody doesn't get it, but it's consistent with the rest of our stuff, change it. Make it right so that it supports their need, but document it that this is a different thing and the reason why. So usability does trump consistency. Make sure that they're feeling control. Oftentimes, software comes across as I'm just kind of doing what it tells me to do, right? That's not a really great feeling for users to have. And you want them to sort of feel like they're in control because they will spend more time with it, and they will take the time to learn it more if they feel like they're the ones driving it versus being told how to do things. Feedback, both positive and negative. I heard you. Yes, we're moving forward. Oh, something's not right. There's an error message to let you know. But they constantly let them know that you heard them and it's progressing and it's doing things. I talk about prevent errors and enable them to resolve the errors. These two go together, right? You do everything you can to make it eliminate mistakes, right? But when a mistake happens, you don't throw up an error 210 invalid field, right? It's not helpful at all. Allow them to recover in a way that feels natural to them. So complete system failure, sure, you want a big screen that pops up and says, sorry, go get a coffee. It's going to be a while. But if it's just, I forgot to put the last number in on my zip code when I was filling out a form, don't throw up a big message. Just sort of tailor it to where the user, it feels natural to them that the urgency in which you're telling them something's working feels about the level of urgency of the mistake that happened. And more often than not, a user mistake is just, I forgot to put the letter in. The software mistake is, the user just doesn't know what to do because it wasn't designed really well. And so you can't blame the user all the time on that kind of thing. And then, what else do I want to mention on here? I'm going to jump to this last one here, design for different user types. I talked about this a little bit earlier, that you have those different personas. You also have different levels of expertise within those personas. So you need to design for experts and novices and figure out the way, where is that line, where is that balance that makes sense, and you'll test it. This isn't just, what do I feel, what's my gut telling me? You're going to get a sense from people like, this is too complicated for me, or where's the data? Like, I need to drill down on this. And so you sort of calibrate the design to the users. As we're starting to get into the details of it, you start to document the actual components of the design. And this software, guys, will start to really like this part, because now I have a toolkit that I can pull from. And making sure that if the designer's already thought through, we have 3 types of buttons. Here's what happens when the mouse hovers over it. Here's what happens when somebody clicks on it. All that kind of thing. Again, this is mostly user interface guys are doing this. Then when the software is developing something, they're not, what is this button supposed to do? They can start to think about the bigger stuff, the more challenging parts of software development. Not, should I put a curve around the button or is it square? Like, just build a toolkit and let folks use that. That's all part of this sort of detailed design. But as it matures, you're starting to put in the why of things. And the more, it's not just use this button, but it's like, here's how we treat language. We don't use title case, we use sentence case. We don't use abbreviations, except for here, we do it like this, but we don't do it like this. Start guidelines in place so that when a new feature comes out, or the next release comes out and something needs to be built, you can just basically look up and say, okay, that's right, we do it this way, here's the examples that we have, and we sort of build that. This sort of leads to a much greater efficiency over time. It's a little bit of a heavy lift at the beginning, having to document all this, but release after release after release, it pays off exponentially. I don't have to keep going back and redesigning something that we already designed in the first draft, and I don't have to have a developer who doesn't have time go back and try and figure out why we did what we did last time. It's somewhere that they can see it, it's somewhere they can access it, and they sort of learn from that. Oftentimes you get people call style guide, right? Brands have this all the time. Here's our logo, don't angle it, don't make it red, don't do this. It's a PDF, we put it on our server, that's where it lives. Then the next draft comes out, next draft, now we're on version 22. I have version 20, which version do you have? Suddenly there's a lot of confusion on what's real. So today we put this all online, we put it all browser accessible. If a change is made, it's made instantaneously. I can go there and see the latest icons. I can pick the one I want. I could download it, say what color I need a blue one this time. I put it in the code and off I go. And if the design changes over time, or there's a new feature or anything like that, we update this so that that team can stay on track and make sure that they are supporting all those user stories that we came up with, all that time we took to figure out why somebody wanted to do it this way is documented here, and you sort of bring everybody along to say, we just didn't do it because, we did it because there's these reasons, and here's the end results of those. So once you have gone through that process and you've shown a lot of really ugly wireframes and gotten all the big problems worked out, you've refined it down to the details of what's on every screen. You started to build out all the tools so that it can be implemented consistently from release to release, different dev teams picking it up, going with it, they know what they're doing. You start to build that consistency in the air, and in the end, that reduces onboarding time. So we designed a client came to us and had a series of big industrial equipment in a factory floor. And they had basically high school graduates come in, work in machinery every day, work their 9 to 5, they go home, right? But they sometimes have to go from machine to machine, and each one was designed by a different software team, all for the same company, but they were all different in some way. They had the same color, right? No, they had the same logo in the same spot, but they were very different. They asked us, can you harmonize this? Can you make this more consistent? We were floored by the numbers that we got back of how quickly someone who had been working on this big giant piece of equipment here went to something totally different, and they were going to train them, and they're like, yeah, I know how this works. I know that, I know that, I know that. What's this thing? All they focused on was what was different now. They didn't have to learn a whole new piece of software because 80% of it was consistent with the one they just stepped over from. And so the training time went way down for this, which saved them tons of time, tons of money, all that kind of thing. So that consistency does pay off. It increases comprehension because that consistency is there. You've built it in. You made sure that it works the way that their other programs work. It fits in with their day the way it's supposed to. And so if you look at these things, reduces onboarding time, increases comprehension, and we go back to intuitive, readily learned and understood, and feels natural, like that's just the result of going through these methodical steps, letting each one build on the other, and each one learning from the previous one. That's how you get to intuitive. It's not in the crystal ball, tell me what it should be. You end up there through process. And so I'm going to end on just one more list, and this is one that there's some terms in here that we use that represent certain concepts, and if you can make improvements on each one of these, again, don't solve for perfect, but you make improvements on each of these, that level of intuition is going to go way up. So first one's discoverability. This is let users find what they need, right? So that goes back to the degree of ease in which they can find the thing they're looking for. So if you spend a little bit of time and say, okay, we put this new feature in, we buried it 4 levels down in settings. Might be appropriate because it's something they only touch once a year. That might make sense, but if it's something that they touch once a week or every day, you might have hidden it too far. And so that discoverability of finding that new feature and being able to use it effectively is too low. And so you got to bring that up to the right level so that degree of ease is better. Affordance. This is one that I look at something and I know what it's going to do, right? So if I think of your steering wheel, I know what a steering wheel is, and I know what happens when I turn it one way, and I know what happens when it turns another way. You pick your controls on the screen in the same way. You don't create some novel new mechanic for something that can be done simply with a slider with a 0 and a 100 on the other side, and they can slide back and forth, right? They look at it, they know what it does. A plus, that means add something, right? That's affordance. Everybody sees a button with a plus on it. You know you're adding something. You look around it to see what I'm adding, right? That's what that is. Expectation is, when I turned the steering wheel, did I go right? Good, okay. It did what I thought. Perfect, right? That's exactly what I thought it'd do. Boy, I'm smart. I really know how to use this thing, right? I add that plus, a new thing is added. Perfect. This is working exactly the way I thought it would, right? So those do go hand in hand. So show what looks obvious and make it behave the way that it should. Efficiency. So I get in every project, not every project, most projects, I'll come across the click counter. Anyone dealt with a click counter when you're putting something here? It took me 5 clicks to get here. This other thing took me 3. That one's more efficient, right? And so they started to create a metric of how many clicks did it take me to do something, right? That's not a great metric, right? What you want is minimal effort. So if somebody was saying, okay, well, TurboTax, just put the whole form on one screen. Nobody has to navigate anywhere. Everything's there. The whole tax code is already available on one page. That's obviously less clicks, way easier. No, it's not, right? TurboTax, you've got a lot of clicks to be able to move from thing to thing. I can watch a video. I can not watch a video. I can pick this. There's a lot of interaction there. But the overall effort of preparing my taxes was way less, right? So the efficiency is high, even though the interactivity may be more. So it's a fun debate to get into that one. I'm saying, oh, God, you made to press the button 10 times. Okay, maybe I can do it in 8, but I'm not getting down to 2. Like, let's figure out where that custom line, that line is. Responsiveness. So I'm sure I have developers in here, and responsive means it scales depending on what size product I have. True, absolutely true. What we're referring to here is that the user knows that the software is reacting to what they wanted it to do. So I pressed the button, it looked like it pressed, it gave me an indication that it's doing something. It's responding to me, right? That's really important. I've come across software where you, like generate report. I press it, it blinked, and I wait. Is it generating a report? Is it not? Oh, there it is. I see a PDF downloading now suddenly, right? There's that moment where I don't know. I would hate that in my financial thing. Make a transfer. Okay, I don't know. Make a transaction. Transfer, right? Suddenly I did 5 transactions. I only wanted 1. Like, you need to let somebody know that it's doing something, even if it's going to take a little while. So touch, heard you, give me a minute. Your report will be here in a second. Right? That's what I'm talking about by responsive. Touch it. Something's not right. Here's where can you go take a look at this and make a little change here so that we can get to where you want to be. All responsive. It can be positive or negative, but they need to see that the tool is doing what I want it to do. It's listening to me and it's moving forward. And then forgiveness. This goes back to the errors. We're going to try and design this as error-free as possible, but it's human-machine interface. There's going to be mistakes, right? People make mistakes. Software is written not so great. Different things happen. You need to account for that. And there's different levels of errors that we look at. One of them is called a slip, and that's just purely I forgot to add the last digit of my zip code, right? You forgive that. You give them a quick, easy way to fix it, right? It's just understanding the potential errors that they can make, the severity of them, and how the software should react to that. And prevent as many as you can, but let them recover as easily as possible from ones that do occur. And so one more, sorry, I thought we were on the last one. Explorability. This kind of goes hand in hand with discoverability. So discoverability I talked about is, there's that thing I'm looking for, is it where I thought it would be, right? Explorability is, I feel comfortable using this software and I don't feel like I'm going to get lost. Right? I can take some time to learn this thing and don't feel like I'm going to make a huge mistake and never got to back away and call tech support. Right? You want them to have that comfort in being able to feel like they can explore it without it being a disaster. And so on any one of these, anything you're designing, if you can just sort of move the needle a little bit more on each one of them, or just even as a checklist, hey guys, have we dealt with sort of the forward and store? Our controls look like they're supposed to be. Did we put this in the right place? Just sort of work through this. And if you can move them all, make them all a little bit better, that intuitiveness is just going to come naturally out of the process. So that's it. Whew.